how to read chord diagrams, and how to play chords with tips. So, what is a chord? A chord is a group of typically 3 or more notes sounded together that combine harmoniously. Tip number 1. Ukuleles have 4 strings, so the maximum amount of different notes you'll hear together is 4. And what is a chord diagram? A chord diagram or chord chart is a visual representation of a chord. It tells you which finger goes on which fret and on which string, so in case you come across a chord you don't know, you'll still be able to play it. Most chord diagrams will look very similar to the following image. Tip number 2. Chords, or even finger positions, can be presented in this way for all fretted instruments. The number of all vertical lines, aka the strings, will vary depending on the amount of strings on the given instrument. But which way round? Chord charts are more commonly situated vertically rather than horizontally, like tabs. Tip number 3. Check our other how-to videos for more information on how to read tabs. Horizontal lines. The horizontal lines on the chart represent the metal frets on the neck of the ukulele. The top line will generally be bolded or marked by a double line, which indicates the ukulele's nut. The nut is the white, sometimes cream-coloured or black object at the top of the fretboard near the tuners, that elevates the strings over the fretboard. The boxes that follow below the nut represent the different frets. The first row of boxes represents the first fret, the second row represents the second fret, and so on. Vertical lines. The vertical lines that run down the diagram represent the 4 strings of the ukulele. The G string, closest to your head, is on the left of the diagram, followed by the C, E, and A string, which is on the right of the diagram and furthest away from your head. Tip number 4. Strings are also numbered from bottom to top. Your first 4 chords: C, A minor, F, and G. C. You only need 1 finger for C. It's your 3rd finger on the 3rd fret of the A string. All other strings can be played open. A minor. Again, you will only need 1 finger for A minor, this time your 2nd finger. Please press down the 2nd fret of the G string and all the other strings will need to be played open. F. For F, you will need 2 fingers. First, the 1st finger on the 1st fret of the E string, and your 2nd finger on the 2nd fret of the G string. The other strings need to be played open. G. For G, you will need your 1st finger on the 2nd fret of the C string, your 2nd finger on the 2nd fret of the A string, and your 3rd finger on the 3rd fret of the E string. The G string can be played open. Letters. The letter at the top of the chart is the name of the chord. Tip number 5. A small M next to the chord letter indicates that this is a minor chord. For example, A-M is read as A minor. If the letter is not followed by anything else, it's a major chord. However, when reading, for example, A, one would normally say A, but could also say A major chord. Numbers next to the letters indicate additional notes or flavour added to the chord. For example, A followed by a 7 is read as A7, and A-M7 is read as A minor 7. A maj 7 is read as A major 7. And if this is analysed, it means that it is an A major chord with the addition of a major 7 note or interval. And now for some 7th chords. A minor 7 or C6. Yep, you got it. All the strings need to be played open. A7. In A7, your first finger needs to be on the first fret of the C string and the rest of the strings are played open. C7. With C7, your first finger needs to be on the first fret of the A string and everything else played open. E minor 7. With E minor 7, your first finger would need to be on the second fret of the C string, your second finger on the second fret of the A string, and the other strings played open. Black dots. The black or any other coloured dots on the diagram tell you which frets and strings to place your fingers on. Numbers. The numbers inside or next to the dots indicate which fingers to be used on each of the frets. They correspond to the 4 fingers of the fretting hand. Number 1 is your index finger. Number 2 is your middle finger. Number 3 is your ring finger. And 4 is your pinky finger. You don't usually need to use the thumb to fret, except in special circumstances. In those cases, there would be a T inside or next to the black dot. Numbers can also sometimes be found written along the bottom of the strings of a chord chart, represent the different frets, or between the nut mark and the chord name instead of inside the dots. 4 more chords: E minor, D, A, and D minor. For E minor, you need your first finger on the second fret of the A string, your second finger on the third fret of the E string, and your third finger on the third fret of the C string. The G string will be played open. D. For D, your first finger will need to be pressed on the second fret of the G string, your second finger on the second fret of the C string, and your third finger on the second fret of the E string. The A string will be played open. A. Your first finger will need to be pressed on the first fret of the C string. Your second finger will need to be on the second fret of the G string. The E and A strings will both be played open. D minor. Your first finger will need to be on the first fret of the E string, your second finger on the second fret of the G string, and your third finger on the second fret of the C string. The A string will be played open. X's and O's. An X above the bolded nut mark indicates a string you don't pick or strum. Alternatively, you may have to mute the string. An O in the same location means to play the string open, so without holding down a fret on that string. Tip number 6. If a string needs to be muted, simply touch it without pressing it down, with one of your free fretting fingers, or move one of your fretting fingers so it's touching the said string. And now for some 7th chords. G7. For G7, your first finger needs to be on the first fret of the E string, your second finger on the second fret of the C string, and your third finger on the second fret of the A string. The G string will be played open. B7. Your first finger will need to be on the second fret of the E string, your second finger on the third fret of the C string, and your third finger on the fourth fret of the G string. The A string will be played open. E7. For E7, your first finger will need to be on the first fret of the G string, your second finger on the second fret of the C string, and your third finger on the second fret of the A string. The E string will be open. D minor 7. You need all of your fingers for this chord. First finger on the first fret of the E string, second finger on the second fret of the G string, your third finger on the second fret of the C string, and lastly, your fourth finger on the third fret of the A string. Chords on higher frets. If the chord diagram is showing frets higher than the 4th or 5th fret, the top line of the chart will not be bolded or doubled, and fret numbers will be shown. either to the left of the 4th string or to the right of the 1st string, to help you find your way on the fretboard. The fret numbers can be shown with Roman numerals or with the letters FR and the fret number. For example, VI 6FR or FR6 indicates that the top fret on the diagram is fret number 6. Tip number 7. Check the dots on your fretboard to help you locate the higher frets. How a bar chord is charted. Bar chords are chords that involve using one finger, usually your index finger, to hold down multiple strings on a single fret simultaneously. A bar is noted on a chord diagram by a curved or solid line running through a fret from the first note to the last note of the chord, or by a series of dots in the same fret that all bear the same number. And here are some bar chords if you're up for a challenge. B flat. The diagram indicates that the first fret of both the A and E strings will be pressed on the first finger. Then your second finger on the second fret of the C string, and the third finger on the third fret of the G string. B minor. The diagram here indicates that the second fret of the A, E and C strings will need to be pressed with your first finger, and the third finger on the 4th fret of the G string. D7. We'll need your first finger here for the second fret of the E, C and G strings, and your second finger on the 3rd fret of the A string. C minor 7. The diagram indicates that the 3rd fret of all strings need to be pressed with your first finger. Or you can try and use all 4 fingers. Righty or lefty? Since chord diagrams are typically written for right-handed players, they provide a challenge to left-handed players who have to do a bit of revisualization by flipping the chart around. If you're confused with the right-handed version, you can download left-handed guitar chord charts online. Tip number 8. Alternate fingerings. You might come across a suggested chord fingering that you simply cannot get your fingers to play. In this case, try experimenting with alternate fingerings. The most commonly used fingerings, however, will work for most players. A couple more tricky chords for you here. E. E major needs your first finger on the 1st fret of the G string. The 2nd fret of the C string needs to be muted with the 2nd finger, and the 2nd fret of the A string will be pressed with your 3rd finger. The E string needs to be played open. Reminder, you can mute a string by slightly touching it, not fully pressing it down. An alternative way is to use the 1st finger for the 2nd fret of the A string, 2nd finger on the 4th fret of the G string, your 3rd finger on the 4th fret of the C string, and your 4th finger on the 4th fret of the E string. A flat. So the diagram indicates here that it begins on the 3rd fret. The 3rd fret of the C string needs to be pressed with your 1st finger, 2nd finger on the 3rd fret of the A string, and your 3rd finger on the 4th fret of the A string. The G string will need to be muted with your 4th finger, or avoided completely when strumming. Alternative way to play A flat. The diagram indicates that it begins on the 3rd fret. The 3rd fret of the A and C strings need to be pressed with your 1st finger using a bar chord. The 4th fret of the E string needs to be pressed with the 2nd finger, and the 5th fret of the G string pressed with your 3rd finger. Capo. A capo is a device a musician uses on the neck of a stringed, typically fretted instrument. It is used to transpose and shorten the playable length of the strings, hence raising the pitch. A capo can be used to raise the pitch of a fretted instrument, so you can play in different keys, but use fingerings that you're familiar with. In effect, a capo uses a fret of an instrument to create a new nut at a higher note than the instrument's actual nut. The use of a capo is usually indicated with the word capo, followed by the Roman numeral or number of the fret that the capo needs to be placed at. Tip number 9. Now that you've learned how to play major and minor chords, notice the difference in the sound and texture. The major chords sound happy and the minor chords sound sad. Tip number 10. There is more than one way to play a chord. Some ways might be easier and some might sound better and some might be more convenient. Like if you're changing from or to another chord. If you're going to and from certain chords, you might want to mute different strings. Start by learning the basic or the open shapes and move on to shapes with no open strings or using bars that are transferable. For example, they can be used to play different chords depending on the fret number. For more information on chords and other ukulele tips, please check out our other how-to videos. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Have a great day.